Hello, welcome everybody to the Public Safety Drone Review. Thanks so much for being here with us. We're going to give everybody just a minute to enter the room and then we'll get started. All right, happy to see everybody here today. Thank you, as always, for taking the time out, especially on a holiday week. We're really delighted to see everybody. Hi, Jason, how are you? And please participate in the conversation. I am Miriam McNabb. I'm editor at Drone Life. With me, as always, Charles Warner, Chief Charles Warner of Drone Responders, Timothy Martin, Director of UAS Training at the Regional Training Center, and our esteemed guest today, Mark Bathrick, formerly Director of Aviation at the Department of the Interior, currently founder of Bathrick Aviation Consulting, and a member of the Drone Responders Board of Advisors. Mark, thank you so much for being here. Your expertise always very much appreciated.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a pleasure to be back again. Thank you very much for having me.
As always, if anybody has to step out or wants to share later, this will be posted on the Drone Life TV YouTube channel. Again, that's Drone Life TV. Apparently, we aren't the only people who ever called ourselves Drone Life. So you can view it there sometime over the next week. Please put questions into the chat or the Q&A box. We do try to get to those as we're able to. And we're going to start off the conversation, as we always do, by talking about some of today's current news stories. So we're going to start off with a good one, I guess. The San Francisco PD has accepted billionaire's $9.4 million gift to set up more drone-in-a-box systems. What do we think about that? All good? Do we know if there are any strings attached? We'll
There's
talk.
always strings attached.
Always strings attached. Well,
This concept of donations, it's not new to law enforcement. I don't know about the rest of the country, but I know in California, almost every police department has some sort of police cheerleading organization out there, foundation. Usually they're called police foundations, and they're all charitable. This is exactly what they do. Is they go out there, they get money to be donated. In Huntington Beach, almost every single one of our canine dogs over the last 20 years has been bought by one single lady that lives in our city, and that's her life goal, is to buy police dogs for our department. So accepting donations like this through a charitable organization is nothing new. So San Francisco, if for those that have never been there or never lived in California, it's almost comical that San Francisco is so forward movement, over the top with their drone program. The last city you would ever, actually Berkeley was the last city I would ever expect to have drones, but San Francisco was right up there. So it's good. It's really good stuff. I like it.
all right. And they're setting up those drone-in-a-box systems, kind of drone docks, which I think really have so many other applications in addition to police work. If you think of that in terms of city infrastructure, that really has the potential to assist multiple departments, certainly police and fire, emergency services, but also maybe transportation or whoever else, if they're willing to give access at some point, maybe they can work out that collaboration. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, and San Francisco is demographic wise and geographically, it's like the perfect city for that. The hills and lowlands, and putting a dock on every fire station is, I think, what a lot of DFR programs envision would be how they would deploy it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that works out.
Yeah.
I think the key is when you're looking at this, it's like the initial donation, but you've got to make sure that you've got the wherewithal to continue the program beyond that donation. So that's the next key.
Yeah, those programs have long tails. And I would go back to what Tim's saying, as long as they're not telling you what you have to buy or where you can and cannot fly as the donor, no, those kind of strings are, unacceptable, right? But I think it's wonderful and right, it's wonderful that law enforcement agencies have people are willing to step up and donate, because I don't think any law enforcement agency I've ever been associated with has been funded as they absolutely should be.
Right.
Mariah asked an interesting question about which drones did the donation require, which is actually when you talk about strings attached, that's absolutely the first question. Article doesn't state that. I do know personally from being involved firsthand in training San Francisco over the last 6 months, they fly both DJI and Skydio. What dock system they're going with and what drone they're going with, it doesn't say, but if I had to guess, it's going to be Skydio.
Well, see, all right, not at all mentioned in the article because I did look, and I'm sure you did too.
Oh yeah.
All right, this next one, I am really interested to hear what you gentlemen think about this. I know Chief has feelings about this. I know Mark has input. Of course, Tim, this is your direct business here. So FAA certification for police pilots. And the comment is flying them is the easy part. And no kidding. So the point of the article is that, of course, it is actually challenging to train police pilots to pass the Part 107. That requires funding, it requires work, it requires a lot of time. And it's really a new language for most of the staff. So your thoughts?
I can relate, as a student naval aviator, flying was the fun part, preparing for it, learning all the aircraft systems, learning all I had to learn about airspace and FAA and communications and all that stuff. None of that was the fun stuff. It was the flying. But I think it points out a really important part. We've been talking about this for years. The Part 107 in of itself is still, very limited scope. And I think we've seen that more could be done, maybe should be done to educate operators as far as their responsibility as citizens of that shared airspace. And not just for the people in that airspace, but also the people below that airspace. And we've seen that with incursions, and people have come up with the careless, the clueless, the criminal, right? But I think that's all a sign that we could and probably should do more in that training. And I know at Interior, we had dedicated periods, in our 2-week course just to teach that, and we reiterated it throughout the period because you can't expect people to know this who haven't been exposed to it, and I think that's a really important part. But you're right, flying is the fun part.
Yeah, I think the easiest part is probably a little bit a misnomer. In the survey that was done by Chief Pritchard out in Oregon, he did a survey of like 500 people, and out of the 500, only 25% of them did anything more training than Part 107 certification, which is a little bit scary. When you're looking at DFR, it's a little bit different because the DFR pilots are trained are significantly more. They have specific missions and they fly a lot more, and they're more autonomous until they get to the scene. So it really depends how you look at it. I think that there needs to be certification requirements. We just aren't there yet. It's kind of like everything other professions. We didn't start off with firefighter certifications or police officer certifications. Now we have very stringent ones, but we had to learn and we had to get there. Aviation is very new. Comparatively speaking, there's only about 300 public safety aviation programs as far as manned aircraft currently. So now we've gone over 7,000. And we're still learning, so we got a lot to work on yet, and that even with the ongoing continuous training as well, the refresher that isn't happening either.
Okay, for clarity, just to tease this out, Does every police officer need to pass their Part 107?
You mean on the drone teams?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. I think 107s are required. Even if you have well, now you don't have much COAs, but even if you're flying under the new certificate of waiver program, yes, I think they should. It's interesting. I'm hearing a lot of chatter recently about the 107 test being more difficult, more challenging than previously thought of. Like material that is standard study material is not on the test as much as some new material that's on there. I don't know if they changed the test or if anybody knows any insight on that, but there is some interesting conversation about that. And the 107 test, there are tons of online outlets out there where people can study. If you put the time in and prepare for the test, it's not that difficult to be successful. You just got to devote, I think they say about 40 hours of studying for it.
Yeah, it's necessary. It's also important for liability purposes. At least it shows that you have gotten the airspace knowledge as required by the FAA. Under Part 91, as far as public aircraft operation, you can self-certify. We as drone responders don't recommend that because you have to match equal or better than what the FAA is, and sometimes proving that in court could be very difficult. And if you do have a catastrophic failure of the aircraft and somebody gets hurt or killed in the process, all that's going to play into it.
Yeah, and it's a interior, we had, in order to get into the program, you had to have a Part 107. And then we gave you training on top of that. I just want to reiterate what Charles was saying. If you go back and look at, and they're posted online, all the Department of the Interior annual UAS reports, the vast majority of the flying was in training. And I don't care what you're flying, it's a perishable skill. And it's a very unforgiving endeavor. And so that training is essential. And the great news about drones is that they're, unlike jets, they're fairly inexpensive to fly and maintain. So really no excuse to not get that regular training, and stay proficient.
Yeah. Okay, so we did have a comment asking where departments can get resources for training. Tim offered people can send you an email, right? You put
Yeah,
it in the
yeah.
chat for some ideas. I think Drone Responders also has some resources on the website.
Stay
So
tuned. Stay tuned.
stay tuned. Okay. Next article. In Oregon, a bill granting police greater authority with drones fails. That was among the story was really about all of the bills in Oregon that had failed, and this particular one was among them. But when I had looked at it, my thoughts on this was sort of, they had asked for a lot in one bill. None of it was unreasonable to somebody who's sort of entrenched in the world of law enforcement drones. However, it's yet another lesson of sort of having to educate all of the stakeholders. And that just often includes the legislators. So I don't think that there is any easy way of doing that. Someone has commented that the ACLU had a lot of sway with that bill. That's probably true. And all I can say is we're trying to educate the ACLU also as to you know their point, and as they have expressed it to me personally, I can actually understand as a reasonable point. The point that the ACLU is making is that you can't legislate good intentions. So as long as police are saying we don't intend to use it that way, or we're not planning on it, or, that's not what we do, that's not always enough. They want clarity, legislative clarity. So I can understand that, but then you do get into a big mess sort of where you're in freeze hold or kind of nobody can move forward. So education, education, education about the benefits that that using them bring and the downside of not using them, because I think we're seeing there is a serious cost, especially in this day and age, of not using drones as part of your security system for large events and so on. So
I know that Tim's been really pushing hard on this as well. Is you've got to do community outreach. You've got to be transparent. You've got to have your policies and procedures out in the open so that people can see what you will do and what you won't do. I know that for my local police department here, we did a video for them, and they basically said, "Hey, we want to let you know when we're flying our drones, we're going to be, if you see our drones flying, we're on a mission. That's it. We're not doing random surveillance. We're not doing it just to spy on you. We're doing it for a mission. Either it's training or it's flying a mission that we've been dispatched to that we're operating at, or we're doing a demonstration for you." But you've got to be able to do that in front of them. They've got to be able to see it. They've got to be able to touch it. They've got to be able to know what you're doing, and there's got to be accountability. So people need to see what you're flying the missions. Make that as much as you can, just like Chula Vista has all their missions listed, and statistics to show what is the benefit of this. You know, it's nothing greater than one story I heard from Chula Vista where the woman called in and said there was a stranger outside her house and the police were on the way, and she called back and said, "Are you here?" And he said, "Can you look up?" And she looked up and said, "See that drone?" And then she said yes and said, "That's us. You're okay. The person's left." And those kind of stories, the Chula Vista vehicle fire, where the person was saved by getting corrected address from that, literally seconds were not available for that person to survive. So you got to tell the story so that people see it. But you also need to embrace the ACLU and their concerns. And you need to do as much as you can to address those concerns so that you're showing you are concerned about the privacy and the rights of people as well.
So Mark, I just want to bring out one thing that Mark had mentioned in pre-show, which I think is actually a good point, is that prospective programs have an obligation to inform and educate because there are plenty of people willing to fill the void with nonsense if you don't. Just had to bring
Yeah.
that out, Mark, because that's an excellent point.
And Mark Spence, we started the Drones for Good program at Interior in 2006. Our first flights were 2008, and we spent 2 years developing the program, but most importantly, communicating what we were going to do. And like Charles said, we put everything out there, and we just continually, even our operators were taught to go out to the field and talk to the people ahead of, show them what you're flying, show them what you're going to do, and they loved it. The public wanted to see more, and I think when I retired in 2022. The thing I was most proud of, had done 30,000 flights over, public lands, and not one complaint from the public, because they always knew we were going to be out there and what we were going to be doing. And we never left that vacuum for someone else to fill.
That is impressive.
And regarding
Anyone can
Oregon,
do 30,000 of anything and not have a public complaint.
depends on what state you're in.
We were all 50.
Yeah. Regarding the Oregon, this is not, I don't think is limited to Oregon. It's a lot of states that, and cities. I mean, you can have cities within states that have different policies, that have different views. And I always like to just tell departments, just think of the alternative is no drone program at all. You got to be patient. You got to work within the standards to get your program running. And like you said, Miriam, you're going to have a lot of good wins, and you're going to have a lot of people say, "Why didn't we have drones for this?" Eventually, it will even out, I think. Eventually, and trying to cram a bunch of bills together through one legislative session doesn't give them the time to really understand and learn and make the right decision. So
Right.
it's too bad.
All right, there's an interesting comment in the chat. Two good comments. We'll try to get to them both. The first one says, where do you see NDAA Blue 2.0 systems? Will this be codified for federal agency procurement? And at the state level, like Florida, they haven't updated the list in a couple of years. So let me start by clarifying one thing. NDAA compliant is different from Blue 2.0. So I just want to clarify that. I do know what you meant, of course, but NDAA compliance was defined by Trump in Trump's first administration, and it gave a list of protocols in terms of how everything had to be manufactured and so forth in order to be National Defense Authorization certified. And then blue list is put out by the Defense Innovation Unit. And those are platforms that they've evaluated very specifically for Department of Defense use. So you can be NDAA compliant and not on the blue SUAS list. So just to clarify those things, and I think that that's something that a lot of US manufacturers run into, is that they are in fact NDAA compliant. However, the DIU, for whatever reason, probably because they're just not a platform that's of specific interest to the Department of Defense, has not chosen to evaluate them. So that being said, that's my contribution. The rest
Let
of
me
you,
jump.
what do you think is going to happen with that?
Yeah, let me jump in on this. So we had a bill in Virginia, and again, the bans are trying to come out and ban Chinese drones. And the problem is blue drones. Let me speak to that specifically. Blue drones are designed for DoD specifically. Blue drones were never intended for the commercial market or other federal agencies. They were designed for the warfighter because they had a particular need and a particular model that they were interested in, as you said, Miriam, and they test those. They also have limited funding, so they only test those that a component is asking for to be approved to meet those requirements. And as you said, here the other problem is in Virginia, we got $1 million this year that says you have to do it and replace Chinese drones. Well, the question is, okay, so what are we replacing it with? We don't want to go blue drones because it's very narrow and they're very expensive. So then people are saying, okay, let's go with NDAA compliant. Okay, so how do you determine which ones are truly NDAA compliant? Because nobody else is going through any testing that I'm aware of to show that they're NDAA compliant, like maybe the green certification from AUVSI, because they aren't sure of one that it's going to be accepted, and because it's expensive and complicated. So we get into kind of a quagmire of what do we do? But my thought with the blue drones is that they will not continue with the blue drones as being the requirement, but I can't tell you what the answer is, because in addition to that, we're starting to see multiple states with these legislations on Chinese drone bans coming up with their own cybersecurity processes, which means we're going to have this patchwork quilt of different types of security requirements by different states, which is going to be a mess. So we got a mess right now, and I'm not quite sure where it's going.
One thing to consider is that NDA 2020 listed the components that could and could not be used in DoD equipment. In 2022, they updated that, and in NDA 2022, they specifically added the terms "not manufactured in a country of origin." They listed all of those countries. It's a whole host of them, and they also said any company based in those countries or manufactured in those countries. So it's interesting what DIU is doing with the blue list, because you have drones that have not changed a single component and they're getting dropped off the blue list, but that doesn't mean that they're not still NDA compliant. It's just for whatever reason they're being shifted off that list, and it's causing a lot of confusion, I think.
DIU has added new criteria, including how many units did you sell to DoD departments versus commercial. So this is the dropping off the list can have absolutely nothing to do with the platform itself.
Yeah.
It's to do with what the demand was in the different defense departments.
And it's also important for municipal departments that are looking for drones that will qualify as NDAA. Just because they are dropped off the blue list doesn't mean that DoD or federal agencies are prohibited from using those drones, because a lot of those drones that were dropped off the blue list are still in service and being purchased to this day by other military branches other than the Army. So Marines, Air Force, federal agencies are using drones that are not on the blue list. So I really think that it's safe. That I don't know that a certification has to be done if you follow the guidelines of NDAA 2020 and 2022. You can look at a manufacturer, and if all of their components are on there and they match, then the drone is NDA compliant. You know, and the battery is not one of those components. So a battery can be made in China. That's one of the few components that you can possess that's made or manufactured in one of those countries of origin. So it's a confusing system, and I think we need to separate law enforcement, public safety from DIU and military, and just say, if you want to get a drone that is NDA compliant, do your homework, do your research, and hold the manufacturers to a higher standard to make sure that they prove that their drone is NDA compliant. It doesn't have to be on the blue list to be NDA, is the point.
And I think that's the challenge that, you know, we ran into, and here I know other federal agencies, other state agencies, and even commercial entities run into, is how do you verify that? We actually developed a sheet where we had those criteria, and we required the manufacturer of that drone to certify, right? Because we didn't have the capability, the know-how to tear that thing down and search back and figure what the country of origin was for those individual parts. I think that's a huge gap right now in, you know, outside the blue in determining whether it's NDAA compliant. I can list all the requirements, but how do you determine that? You know, do you have a third-party government agency? We use the Idaho National Laboratory and DHS CISA to help us with our security, because, you know, country of origin doesn't necessarily buy you security. You know, some of us are getting free credit monitoring thanks to US equipment and not foreign equipment, right? Anything can be hacked. So I think that's important. And there have been cases, frankly, where the military has bought equipment and thought it was US manufactured, only to find out it wasn't. So, you know, that puts those agencies, you know, at a little bit of a disadvantage, a little bit, you know, risk averse to going to buy something that they can't see as certified NDAA compliant.
But NDAA compliant is a much broader category and allows for a lot more choices than simply the DIU blue list. One other thing that should be mentioned about the DIU blue list, however, was that in the recently passed executive orders, there is a proviso that says those lists need to be updated every 6 months now. So that will be interesting. That will be very challenging. I know the DIU is, you know, working extremely hard on the blue list. They don't have, they didn't get sort of triple funding to increase their staff with that executive order. So yeah, but there is a requirement that that list be updated very frequently now.
And maybe that's why they're dropping off so many platforms, is it's easier to maintain a short list. I don't know. Who knows?
All right. Good conversation. Moving along. Let's see what else we got. Okay. This one, it's a little bit humorous. Unfortunately, it did end you know, in something of a tragedy with the suspect, but Michigan police had a hostage situation. There was a hostage standoff in a bank robbery, kind of a movie scenario, sort of. And they were able to lure the suspect out by tying a Faygo red pop. That is not something we have in Boston, some kind of soda. I don't know what it is, to a drone and dangling the soda from the drone outside. So there you go, a little creativity to solve a standoff problem.
You missed the part of the article that when he came to the window to get the soda, they shot and killed him with a sniper rifle.
Well, that was what I mean,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
I mean, it's
this is not a funny story.
no, it's
that it had a very bad ending, of course, a tragic ending, although I think they were able to save the hostages, but there you go.
Yeah, and we had a local agency that did the same thing with cigarettes. The guy was barricaded in a car, didn't want to come out, and he wanted to smoke cigarettes. So they said, "Okay, we're going to bring your cigarettes to you in a bag with a drone." And that excited him. He was like, "Oh, that's really cool. I want to get my cigarettes from a drone." He, in this particular case, he smoked his cigarettes and came out of the car and surrendered. But apparently, that's not the
Not
case
the
in the
result
other
that was,
in the other situation.
yep, drone delivery. There we go. Okay. Shout out to Cleveland. So we have talked about Cleveland. Persistence pays off, as Mark says, absolutely, because we have mentioned them many times. Unfortunately, they have really had to work for a long time to get their program off the ground. So report says Cleveland police drone policy takes flight. I really just wanted to give them a shout out and say, great job, guys. Okay, and the final story that I had today was something that Charles has already referred to. This is Virginia funds transition to secure drones for first responders. I don't usually put a drone life story up there, but mine had all the best details. I didn't write it. Anyway, this is a drone life story. However, on the substance of this article, it is $1 million, and I know that you all will have something to say about that.
Yeah, so I had a legislator ask me, "Oh, tell us, we had $1 million for you. What does that look like?" And I said, "That buys us 40 drones at $25,000." And they went, "What?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, how many drones we have in Virginia that we need to replace if we wanted to replace all these Chinese drones?" I said, 1,000. And she went, "Oh my." So there's a reality that comes along with this that if you want to do this, and there's reasons for it. I mean, there's a whole lot of different issues of subsidization by the Chinese and lower labor costs and all those kind of things. But the reality is $1 million buys 40 drones that are meet the requirements.
Yep. Yep. So there's that. Anyone else want to comment on that before we move along?
You got to ask the practitioners if you want to actually deliver something that's meaningful, just like Charles said.
I just want to go back to the last article. I got to do it, Miriam, because those guys have worked so hard to get their drone program up. If you're in that position, starting your drone program, and you have a critical audience like they did, unfortunately, the first flight they made violated their policy and possibly is going to cause major drama for them. So if you read the article, they used the drone inappropriately for their very first flight after approval. So just be careful. Really, really understand what you have and the blessing you have, and don't abuse it. Use your drone responsible because everyone's watching. There's no doubt about that. But congratulations to them.
And after you got up, that might be the only chance you have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
They were excited. They were very excited to get up there and fly their drone. They just picked something that was technically in violation of the policy. So actually the policy wasn't even approved yet. So that was the other problem.
All right. Well, fingers crossed that they're able to help the community sometime soon. All right. So let's move over. We are so lucky to have Mark Bathrick with us. Mark, you're a drone guru. You are such a valuable resource. And recently, you published this great article for Commercial UAV News. Shout out to them. The Elephant in the Airspace. So let's start off, give a little bit of a summary of what the elephant in the airspace is. And this is really a conversation on the really big things that we need to think about to be able to move forward in this industry.
Yeah. So, thank you. Thank you for the kind words. So it actually has been, so I've been a pilot for 45 years. Wow. And, flown a lot over the United States and overseas. And this has been bugging me for a long time, as you might imagine. And we've talked about the elephant in the room, right? It's that unsaid, uncomfortable item we just kind of ignore, and that's where the title came up with. And it's basically that 96%. I mean, it's such a huge number. It just boggles the mind of all the airspace from the surface to 400 feet and even higher in some places is Class G, uncontrolled airspace. And as a manned aircraft pilot, I know that I don't have to, if I'm flying VFR, I do not have to have a radio or a transponder even on board, much less use it. And that's about 21% of all the general aviation aircraft registered in the United States don't even have that equipment, and it's legal. And because of that, we are in a situation where the analogy I use is we're driving these super sophisticated cars, but we're driving them on roads that used to be horse trails, and the horses still have right of way. And so we can't use automatic features. We have to keep our speed down. And it's not just for, I was so excited when the two EOs came out. They were great executive orders. But even if we do everything that they're asking to be done, it's still within this construct where the horses have the right of way. And so BV loss, counter UAS are going to be, limited by this construct. So I've been wanting to write this article for probably 15 years and finally had the opportunity to.
So to dive in, and gentlemen, please, right? Let's talk about sort of dive in a little bit, get into this sort of nitty-gritty of what's wrong here and how big a problem and what scale is the change? I mean, is it just switch out technology, or is it
No,
completely retrain, or?
so let's use DFR as one example. So DFR from 2018 to 24 had 50 DFR drones and first responder programs. The waivers changed to allow more leniency to allow us to fly 200 feet and below, ADS-B and receiver, and again, for something that not everybody uses or has. And we've now gone from 50 in that 6 years to 300 in 2 months. Okay, so that's just showing you that exponential growth that we're seeing with adding more complexity and population in airspace. Now, let's go to Part 108. What does Part 108 mean? It means beyond visual line of sight. It means more delivery stuff. It means heavier lift drones. At least I think that's what it means. None of us know because we haven't seen it. But we are about to see this opening up of the airspace, which has lots of things flying that aren't communicating. Now, let's jump over to the disaster side, because this is the part that I've had conversation with Mark. And if you've seen my thing on LinkedIn, hey, I'd like to have a DoD contact, which still nobody's reached out to me, to say, when we have disasters, we've got lots of drones. And Asheville, North Carolina was a great example where they were doing some stuff using heavier lift agricultural drones to pick up shopping carts and deliver supplies to people that were inaccessible. But over the horizon comes military aircraft flying at very low altitudes without transmitting ADS-B, and that shouldn't be allowed. If we look back at the DCA mid-air crash, one of the contributing factors is it was not transmitting ADS-B in that complicated airspace, even when it had it. So Tim Kaine has put in the new FAA safety bill. One of the requirements is that those are limited now. You can't have that many space, but will it pass? I don't know. But we're getting ready to be really busy. So the question is, now what?
What do you say to the people who say, hey, we were here first?
Well, that's what the horses said, right? It doesn't work. I mean, there's so many different analogies, right? The airspace and the regulations were built in the 50s for the technology and the markets of the day, right? At that point, the best technology for not hitting someone else was see and avoid. That is not the best technology we have. And the DCA accident proved that, right? That was a clear night and they still collided, cost 67 people their lives. But we've stayed with that as the gold standard. It is no longer the gold standard. And we've ignored that. And you ask the question, what's it take? I mean, the first thing is everybody should be electronically visible. You know, universal electronic conspicuity, to use the term, right? You know, how do you do 108 or how do you do counter aircraft when you don't even know what's in your own airspace? I mean, that's the first thing. And today the technology is such that you can put them on a glider, you can put them on an ultralight, you can put them on a drone, right? And we talk a lot about ADS-B, but we should remember that ADS-B was made for manned aircraft, and there's certain limitations, especially at low altitude with that, and how it's. So we should look at what do we want? We want them to all be electronically visible. Maybe ADS-B is a component of that, but maybe it's not the only component. Maybe we have vehicle to vehicle, like we do in our cars. You get the little yellow light that says there's a car next to you. You only care about the car next to you. You don't care about everybody else, right? So we have to look at those in terms of what do we want for requirements. But the bottom line is everybody who flies in the United States, whatever altitude, should be electronically visible. We start with that, and then we can go forward. But until we have that, beyond visual line of sight, counter UAS are going to have these huge gaping holes that even the executive orders, which are very, very great executive orders, are not going to be able to fix.
We have UTM, right?
It's a great system and a great component, right? But to your point, Charles, if it can't see everything, if not everything is in that system, because you've got a Cub flying at, low altitude, doesn't need anything, then it can't be seen.
But we don't even have UTM. It's a concept.
I know. Well, let's go there.
Miriam, it's funny what
Remote
you,
ID though.
yeah, remote ID. It's funny what you say, Miriam, because every mode of transportation that we've ever had in our lives in the history of man, from walking to wagons to horses to bicycles and cars, that we all still use them today. We adapt, we put bike lanes on streets, but everyone's still riding bikes. Everyone's still driving carts with horses and walking and stuff. So we have to adapt no matter what. And you bring up remote ID, and it's interesting. We have a remote ID receiver on our building, and we're getting 30 to 40 drone flights a day in a 6-mile radius. That's just in a 6-mile radius in part of Orange County. There are drones up in the air everywhere, and they're varying altitudes, varying experience. You could tell which drones are being flown by people with experience, and you could tell which ones are being flown by people that have no idea what they're doing. And those are just the drones that are remote ID compliant out there flying around. So yeah, the airspace is crowded, there's no doubt about it.
Let's add one more thing. We don't even have any collision lights on these drones. Why don't we have any collision lights on them so we can see it? And John Meehan really pointed this out to me, really important. He said, when I, as a pilot in a manned aircraft, see a red or white blinking light, I know that can kill me. Instead of something that becomes invisible that you can't see, because in most cases with all these collisions, it's occurred but before anybody had a chance to even see it, or they hadn't have enough time to react. But at least with the anti-collision lights, it would give us a chance to be able to see that drone. And so one person told me, why don't you go ask for emergency rulemaking to say every drone that flies ought to have anti-collision light. They're about $50 but they change the whole dynamic of what happens in the airspace. So that's my suggestion to start.
Let's think about this in terms of like what Tim just said, where he said, every mode of transportation has had to do this. And I have, back in the day, written quite a bit about the parallels between the development of the automotive industry and the development of the drone industry, and how in the beginning, the rules held the automotive industry back from far below its capabilities, right? You had to go at 4 miles an hour because you had to have the guy with the red flag running in front of the car in order to warn any animals in advance. At one point in Maine, you actually were supposed to hide your automobile behind the nearest vegetation if you saw an animal so that they wouldn't be frightened of you. But at some point, of course, the volume of cars exceeded the number of people, transporting themselves by horse to such an extent that the cars took precedence, right? The infrastructure is now around cars. If you want to ride a horse out on Route 95 in Boston, you're going to have a problem, right? Because cars take precedence. So at what point do you think, because right now, all of the onus for avoiding a collision is on the drone pilot.
Right.
It is always 100% the drone pilot. That Black Hawk helicopter comes out of nowhere with no electronic conspicuity, but it is all on the drone pilot to manage this.
So to your point, we've already passed that point, and it's just been the last couple of years, right? There's over 1 million drones, over 700,000 drones registered for recreational or commercial uses. There's like 220,000 manned aircraft in the United States. So it's long since passed, right? And I think what really concerns me, and this is the perfect forum because it's a public safety forum, I mean, can any of us imagine a drone with an organ transplant or a DFR, headed to an accident site, bringing blood to a hospital, having to move out of the way of someone out flying for recreation or, taking some executive from point to point in a helicopter? I mean, would we expect our ambulances and fire trucks and police officers to wait while the traffic cleared and not to move out of the way for those sirens and lights? We would never accept that. And yet that's the situation we're in. And I've heard people saying manned aircraft should never have to give way to drones. Well, I hope that changes quickly because drones are quickly, and Charles has provided, and Chula Vista and other agencies have provided amazing examples where, thank goodness, they were able to get there when they were able to get there. And we have to get there. And we have to remember, it's been 13 years since the 2012 FAA authorization that said by 2015, have them integrated. And it's been 10 years since that deadline. And I think no one has addressed this. To me, it's very simple. Get everyone with electronic conspicuity. It's just taking the manned aircraft. The unmanned aircraft are already there. We just need to get everybody else. And to Tim's point, those bike lanes were built, right, to accommodate them. They didn't say, bikes have right of way. You got your lane, right? There are ways to, integrate them, but we shouldn't be backward compatible with folks that are flying around without a radio and out of transponder ADSB. And I'm one of those manned pilots. So, I think I'm not speaking from the unmanned side. It's, it's for your own safety. Now, I've lost lots of friends in mid-airs. All those mid-airs have happened in clear air. And, some of these, like the vehicle to vehicle system, it's spherical. I mean, I'm looking out my cockpit, right? Maybe 25, 40 degrees either side. I have no idea what's going behind me, what's coming in from the side. These systems are going to make our manned aircraft flights safer. So it's just something we need to do. We need to do it quickly.
What proportion of the manned aircraft fleet is not electronically conspicuous? So
my research is about 21%, but here's the problem. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's anybody in there. The law says you can be in there without. So the rules and how I operate as a drone operator, I have to assume that the lowest common denominator is out there. And that lowest common denominator can be anywhere within 96% of the airspace I'm going to be using across things. And let's get into the counter UAS. 96% of the airspace, we will never know who's flying in there. And, we've all been, I was 75 miles away from 9/11 on that day. Does anyone think that can't happen again? Does anybody not know that the Ukrainians are taking aircraft, making them into drones, flying them as drones, dropping bombs, bringing them back, landing them? And we have to know what's in the airspace. It's a baseline requirement, and no one's talking about it. Hopefully we are now.
Tell me, because I have seen a few articles, not many, like from Aircraft Owner and Pilots Association, AOPA, and other. What is the argument against it? Why are aircraft owners and pilots resistant to being electronically conspicuous?
Great question, and it had validity years ago. Those were very costly systems. Okay, but now they're inexpensive. If you have the size, weight, power, and cost that you can put it on a small drone, you can fit it on an aircraft. I've heard the FAA talk about aircraft without electrical systems, like gliders as an example. There are battery operated ADS-Bs out there. How many things do we operate off of our phones that required big systems before, whether it was a GPS system or a huge camera? I mean, in the last couple decades, we have miniaturized so many things. We've connected so many things to our phone that, those arguments just don't hold any water now.
And not only the cost, I think, is that it wasn't that long ago where a manned aircraft recreational pilot had to worry about something being up flying around at 200 feet, 400 feet or wherever. Now, how many drones are in this country? And I think maybe we grew too fast, and we grew too fast because, if the U.S. market was responsible for the only entity responsible for putting drones in the air, we wouldn't have grown as fast. So we have to address the fact that we have so many drones up there in the air that are unskilled pilots that it's just a matter of time.
There's a question that I want to hit on here. It says, is there a role government can play to accelerate the transition to electronic conspicuity in general aviation? And then it's dropped on me where to go, perhaps via loans or subsidies. I don't know about the subsidies part, but I want to say I think it's going to be interesting to see what Part 108 says, because there have been some references to say that there may be some new requirements in Part 108, in addition to which there may also be some changes that say if you're flying without the conspicuity, that you're the one that's now liable and has to give the right of way to drones, which is going to be interesting because that's an insurance issue that if you're not going to have it, that you may be pushed into doing if you want to have insurance for your aviation aircraft. So I would say what's important is when Part 108 comes out, which is expected anytime now, is that when it comes out that you look at that very closely, and if there's ideas about this conspicuity that you want to be addressed, this is where you put your comments in before that becomes a final rule. So you have probably 30 days after that to get those concerns or recommendations in.
And what impact could this have? So right now, right, you want to get a waiver, you have to prove that you can see everything in the air. And the workaround is often like an entire network of ground-based radars.
Right.
Could electronic conspicuity sort of simplify that?
I absolutely think so. I mean, just as if every aircraft was broadcasting its 4D position, right? X, Y, Z time and where it was going, its vector. Certainly the aircraft within, its local area would know that. And, there's some vehicle to vehicle coordination and collision avoidance systems that actually use that technology. Two aircraft, they communicate with each other like, hey, we're going to get close. And they give, vectors away from each other. So they keep it from becoming a collision avoidance system. I used in the article the example of the automotive industry. Right? We have all of these things now to keep us from bumping into each other. And most of them are very short range. Charles mentioned UTM. There's a vehicle to vehicle part. There's also the vehicle to infrastructure part. So I can transmit back, I can receive information from the UTM system. And I think, and FAA's talked about this infocentric NAS, right? It's going to be all, digital in the future. So we're heading in that direction. It's just, we have to plug, these legacy aircraft in there because you're right, Miriam. Otherwise we have to go through all of these contortionist moves to, very expensive and frankly, not foolproof methods to see what's out there. I've been without radar contact, almost been shot down a couple of times because they didn't know who I was because they weren't picking up my transponder, and we've seen that recently. So we have to have, multiple systems, but we have to start with a baseline. Everybody should be electronically visible, and we're not, and there's really no ongoing effort to make that happen at this point.
Are you sure they didn't know it was you?
Maybe they did. I don't know. Thanks, Charles.
All right, we have like 5 more minutes. So this is just a huge, it's kind of a paradigm shifting thing, right? It's something where will the government get it together to say, okay, guys, no more lobbying on this, no more, no more messing around, you have to do it. What about the military? Because those Black Hawk helicopters, right? It's the military, and they're saying we don't have to tell anybody anything. Everything's on a need to know basis, and nobody needs to know.
Well, 25 years as a Navy pilot, flying a lot of low-level missions, a lot of, missions of the United, training missions over the United States. That's bogus. Okay. And I've had 16 years as director of aviation interior. We had ways of flying and still squawking and still concealing our law enforcement aircraft from nosy people. And same thing in the military. So the systems not only exist, they've been practiced for decades. And so there are workable solutions that don't require you to be electronically invisible. I would use our recent strike. We seem to have sent B-2s, halfway across the world and nobody knew it. How do we do that? Well, there are ways we can do that. And so I think that's an unhelpful, kind of specious argument. It's an easy out, and we shouldn't allow that.
When we're talking about the safety of the national airspace, this is a whole different world that we're in today than we've ever been in before. And it's about to change before. And there was a question up here about Part 108. Is it the silver bullet? No, I don't think that Part 108 is the silver bullet to anything. I think it's going to be a door that opens, but how far does it open and what else does it bring with it that maybe isn't addressed that should be? So we're all waiting.
Yeah. And like we mentioned, we are still, the drone operator is entirely responsible. So, setting up those networks of ground radars and so forth to make sure that you can see everything that's in the airspace is, thank goodness that they're there and they're totally useful and those systems are getting better and better, but still it is a serious limitation and it limits the return on investment for all these commercial operations. So
And we haven't talked much about the counter UAS. I want to give them, it makes their job exceedingly difficult because what if they see something and it's not squawking? Are they going to shoot it down? Well, what if it's some old guy like me flying in a Cub legally? It doesn't have a radio, doesn't have a transponder. Nobody wants to, write that accident report or press release that they shot down some old codger in his Piper Cub, right? So we need to get it not only for Part 108 and the drone industry, but we need to get it for our own airspace sovereignty.
Yep. Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much. That was it. It was a great article. It's a really meaningful conversation, and it has, the potential for really huge impact on the entire NAS. So thank you for that. Tim, as always, great to see you, my friend.
Thank you.
Chief, you also. All right, we are at the end of the hour. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Thank you for contributing. And as I said, we will be posting this to the Drone Life TV YouTube channel sometime over the next week or so. In the meantime, we will see you next month. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.